used to think revenge was loud. Screaming, smashing things, making scenes. Turns out real revenge is quiet, calculated, dressed in silence and sealed with a polite smile. 2 years after my husband walked out on me and married someone else, I built something from the ashes. And when I invited him over to sign off on a routine document, he didn't realize. He was helping me activate a business I built with the exact money he once said I wasn't smart enough to manage. The moment he signed, I said, "Thank you, that'll be all." Then I smiled and closed the door. If you're into real, quiet revenge stories with emotional depth, don't forget to like, subscribe, and buckle in. This one's personal. We met at the worst possible time, which, of course, felt like the best time. I had just quit my job at a boutique marketing agency, burnt out, underpaid, questioning if I'd ever do something meaningful with my life. He, Nathan, was the one who sat across from me at a mutual friend's rooftop party. White shirt, sleeves rolled, beer in hand, and a grin like he knew how the night would end. He didn't hit on me. He asked what I was passionate about. And after I gave him my practiced, sarcastic, nothing, he said, "That's impossible. You look like a woman with too much heart to not care about something." I remember that line like a melody. I let him walk me home that night. Nathan was 5 years older, already climbing his way through the finance world. He was the kind of guy who read The Economist for fun and called Dave Ramsey cute. But he wasn't cold, not then. He remembered how I liked my coffee, honey, no sugar. He listened to me rant about toxic workplaces. He told me I should write again, just for me. And when I got pneumonia that winter, he didn't just bring me soup. He sat on my floor and reorganized my bookshelf alphabetically. That's the kind of man he was, at least in the beginning. We moved in together 10 months later. He had a spacious condo, modern and clean. I brought the books, the plants, the handmade mugs. He brought structure, routine, an insane amount of button-down shirts. We fit like puzzle pieces. Or maybe I shaved parts of myself to fit into his shape. When we got engaged, my mother said he was a provider. My sister said he was stable. My friends joked that I'd never have to worry about bills again. They weren't wrong. Nathan was good with money, almost obsessively so. He tracked every penny. He had spreadsheets, goals, sub-goals, tax advantages memorized. He even offered to help me manage my own finances until you get back on your feet. And I agreed, because I trusted him. He told me to put what little savings I had into a high-yield joint account we'd both contribute to. He said we could use it one day to invest in something together. He said he'd keep track of it all. He said I didn't need to worry, so I didn't. I found freelance gigs here and there, nothing steady. I stopped looking for agency work. I told myself I was taking a break to figure things out. But truthfully, I started shrinking. Our wedding was beautiful, classy, small, tastefully expensive. He planned most of it. I let him. He liked control. I liked making him happy. The day after the wedding, he moved all our finances into what he called our portfolio. It was in his name. He said it made things easier. I nodded, and something small inside me went silent. Marriage with Nathan wasn't cruel. It wasn't explosive. It was like slowly drowning in warm water. You don't notice how deep you are until your lungs are already full. He never yelled. He didn't cheat, at least not then. He just made decisions without me. We stopped having real conversations. I became his wife more than I was a person. He would update me on our goals. But I had no login, no access, no say. He'd say things like, "Don't stress about money, babe. I've got us." Or, "Let me handle it. You're not wired for this kind of thing." And I started believing him. I remember one night, maybe a year in, I asked him what he thought about me going back to school. He looked up from his tablet and said, "I just don't see the ROI, babe." He said it like a banker, not a husband, not a partner, not someone who once asked me what I was passionate about. I don't remember when the love started fading. Maybe it didn't fade. Maybe it got buried under spreadsheets and investment apps and monthly budget check-ins. But I remember the first time I felt like a ghost in my own life. I was sitting across from him at dinner, at a place he picked, eating food I didn't crave, wearing a dress he bought, with money I didn't own. And he looked past me, right through me, as if I was scenery. And then there was Claire. I didn't meet her at first. I found her through behavior, the late nights, the networking events, the random new cologne. The way he started turning his phone face down on the table. I asked once, carefully. He laughed. He said, "You've been watching too many drama shows." Then he patted my hand and said, "You know I'd never do that to you. You don't even believe in cheating." He weaponized my idealism, my trust, and I swallowed it. Because what else could I do? Where would I go? My money was in our account. My work history was patchy. I didn't even have a copy of our budget spreadsheet. So I stayed, longer than I should have, until one day he came home with this look, calm, resigned. He said, "I think we want different things." We, as if it was mutual. Then he said, "There's someone else. It wasn't supposed to happen, but I owe it to myself to be happy." That was the moment I broke, and also the moment I woke up. The thing no one tells you about heartbreak is that it doesn't come all at once. It doesn't shatter you like glass. It seeps in, slow, quiet, like a leak in your ceiling that you don't notice until everything's ruined. After Nathan told me he was leaving, he gave me a week. A week to pack my things, figure out what I needed, and move out of what had once been our home. He offered money, not much. He called it a cushion. I called it hush money, but I didn't say that out loud. I stayed quiet. Again, it was what I was best at. The first night alone, I crashed on my sister's couch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had imagined the last 5 years. My sister, Jules, tried to talk me into breaking things. A plate, a glass, his face if he showed up again. But I was numb. "He doesn't get that part of me," I said. "If I break, that's still about him. I want nothing to be about him anymore." She nodded. We sat in silence. For the first time in years, I checked my own bank account. Balance, $138.07. I laughed, not the funny kind. The sad, breathless kind that makes people look at you sideways. He had moved everything. Our savings, my savings, into joint investments, all under his name. All with his control. And now it was just gone, not legally, but functionally. Because none of it was mine. He hadn't even offered a fair split. But why would he? I'd never asked for access. I'd trusted him. That was on me. I tried to get angry. I really did. I even Googled revenge ideas for cheating husband. Most of them involved glitter, fish in air vents, or burning things. None of that felt like me. I didn't want to ruin his life. I wanted mine back, so I made a plan, not out of rage, but out of silence, out of shame. First step, find a job, any job. I worked part-time at a bookstore downtown. Minimum wage, long hours. I organized author events, restocked dusty shelves, and pretended to be interested when customers told me about the book they were totally gonna write someday. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something to do with my hands. Something that didn't involve remembering. On my lunch breaks, I applied for freelance copywriting gigs, blog posts, product descriptions, anything. One night, I stayed up until 3 a.m., editing an article about plumbing maintenance. It paid $35. I bought groceries with it. Jules helped when she could. She never made me feel like a burden, but I still did. I was 33, newly divorced, broke, and sleeping in my niece's pink princess bed. It would have been funny if it weren't so tragic, but I kept going. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember that dinner. The one where Nathan looked through me. The moment I realized I'd vanished from my own life. I wasn't going to vanish again. 2 months in, I got a gig writing brand copy for a local candle shop. It paid a little more. They liked my voice. They asked if I could do more, help them with emails, ads, their website. I said yes before I even knew how. I stayed up learning. I took free online courses. I read SEO blogs and watched tutorials until my eyes blurred. I was rebuilding brick by brick, tiny bricks, but still. Around that time, I saw a photo on social media. Nathan with Claire, they were in Italy. She had the same sunglasses I used to wear, the same haircut. It was eerie, like he replaced me with a shinier, more compliant version. The caption said, "Love is when you find your forever person." I wanted to throw up. Instead, I screenshotted it, saved it in a folder I titled, Fuel. I didn't speak to him, not once. Not about the money, not about the divorce. He sent the papers, I signed them. There was no fight, no court, just silence. A few months later, I got a letter. It was from his lawyer. Apparently, the investments we had made jointly, though in his name, were technically still open under both our identities, which meant I had a legal claim to some of it if I wanted to pursue it. He wanted to resolve the matter privately. It was the first time I realized I might have leverage. I met with a lawyer, one who worked pro bono for women recovering from financial abuse. She was sharp, brilliant, and didn't flinch when I told her how I'd let him take control. "We're gonna fix that," she said, and she did. I didn't get everything, but I got enough. Enough to open a small business account, enough to invest in myself. That was the turning point, not the money, the mindset. I moved out of my sister's house and into a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a leaky sink. But it was mine. I had a desk, a second-hand chair, a little whiteboard where I wrote goals in dry erase marker. I made a list, build a freelance client base, make 3,000/month, start an LLC. Never ever ask a man to manage your money again. I drew a tiny crown next to that last one. It wasn't easy. Some months I barely broke even. Some clients ghosted. Some nights I cried into a bowl of cereal because I was too tired to cook. But it was mine. The pain, the wins, the grind, all mine. And slowly I started feeling like a person again. A woman again. Not a wife, not a burden, not a ghost. Then came the call. One of my clients, a skincare brand I'd helped with packaging copy, referred me to a bigger company. They needed a full rebrand. Name, voice, messaging, content strategy. It was more than anything I'd ever done. It terrified me. I said yes. Then I Googled everything I didn't know. I pulled 3 all-nighters, redid the pitch deck 4 times. Cried twice, landed the deal. That job paid for my first real office space. It was tiny, just a room in a co-working building. But it had a door that locked and a window that faced the street. I bought a potted plant, named it Grace. My LLC paperwork came through the same week. I stood in that room, holding the paper, thinking, this is the start of something. I called the company Red Ink Creative, because everything I built came from the things I used to cross out. My mistakes, my shame, my silence. Now it was a name on a wall, a brand, a beginning. And this was only the beginning. The first time I saw my company's name on a check, I cried. It wasn't much. Just $450 for some copy on a website that probably 5 people would visit. But it felt different. It felt like something real. Something mine. Red Ink Creative, in clean, printed letters. A business I built from the silence of starting over. The next year came in pieces. Some wins, some disasters. Some lessons that only come from being the one who has to hold everything up, even when your hands are shaking. But still, I grew, client by client, project by project. Some days I still felt like a fraud. Like the girl who once asked her ex-husband for permission to buy throw pillows. But other days, I walked into that tiny co-working space like I owned the damn building. Because I did own something now. Myself. I remember when I landed my first $5,000 project. It was for a luxury, sustainable fashion brand. Their founder, a woman named Myril, had started her company with nothing but debt and sheer willpower. She said to me, "You have a tone that feels expensive. That's what we want." I nearly choked. No one had ever called me expensive. Not Nathan, not anyone. She wired the money in 2 days, and just like that, I wasn't surviving. I was living. I hired my first assistant, a virtual one at first. Then, 6 months later, I brought on a junior writer, then a designer. Suddenly, red ink wasn't just a name on a screen. It was a team. It was momentum. It was a story that I had written myself. And every time I signed a new client, I thought, this is one step closer. Closer to what? At first, I didn't know. I just knew that I wanted to build something so strong, so solid, that no one could ever erase me again. Then came the wedding invitation. Well, technically, it wasn't addressed to me. It was sent to my sister's house. She handed it to me without a word. Nathan and Claire, a destination wedding in Charleston. Classy, elegant, intimate. Everything he once said he hated. I stared at the gold lettering, the delicate font, the wax seal with their initials. And I laughed. Laughed so hard I cried. I didn't go, of course not, but I watched from the sidelines, the tagged photos, the filtered reels, the caption, "New beginnings with my forever best friend." Claire looked radiant, he looked smug, and I looked at my reflection and thought, I'm not done yet. See, here's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't about destruction. It's about clarity, about letting someone watch you become everything they said you couldn't be, and I was becoming. Around that time, I got invited to speak at a creative entrepreneurship panel. I wore a red blazer, bold, structured, a little too expensive for my budget, but worth it. The panel was hosted by a tech startup accelerator. Afterwards, someone approached me. Her name was Eden. She ran a funding initiative for female-led digital agencies. She asked if I'd ever thought about scaling. I said, I think about it every day. She asked for my deck. I didn't have one, but I made one in 24 hours. Slept 3, cried 2. She called me a week later and said, "We want to fund your next phase." It wasn't $1 million, but it was enough. Enough to get an office space that didn't smell like leftover coffee and despair. Enough to hire 2 more people. Enough to feel like I had crossed into something bigger, something permanent. And then came the twist. While reviewing some of the legal documents for the funding account, the financial rep said, "So, just to clarify, the person listed here as the secondary beneficiary, Nathaniel, do you want to keep that as is or update it?" My blood ran cold. Nathan. See, way back in the early days, when he was helping me manage my finances, we'd opened a joint account. Then later, when I created the LLC and business account, some of the legal details had carried over from old records. He was technically listed as a backup signature on some parts of the business formation. Not an owner, not a partner, just a name, but still a name. My lawyer said it was minor, easy to fix, but something in me clicked. What if I didn't fix it? What if I used it? The idea came to me in pieces. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That wasn't the point. But I could engineer a moment where everything turned, where the power shifted, where I got to see his face as he realized the woman he once dismissed now stood in front of him as someone entirely different. I could invite him in, not as a partner, not as a friend, not as anything, just a signature. I started planning. I made sure all legal paperwork would remain accurate. No deception, no gray areas. I just let things flow naturally, let the story write itself. And then, 2 weeks before I planned to initiate the final step, I got a message from him. It was a short email. Subject, quick question. Text, hey, hope you're well. I heard through a mutual friend you're doing some impressive stuff. Would love to connect sometime. No pressure. No pressure. God, he still wrote like a man who expected the world to bend gently around him. I didn't respond. Not right away. I waited 3 days. Then I replied, "Actually, there's something I'd love your help with. It's related to a business account we once set up together. Would you be open to meeting next week? He replied in under 5 minutes. Of course, let me know when and where. That night I sat in my office, lights low, soft jazz playing. I poured a glass of wine, stared at the city lights outside, and whispered to myself, he's walking straight into it. Not a trap, just a mirror. And I was finally ready to show him the reflection. There's a strange kind of calm that comes right before a storm you created. Not fear, not excitement, just clarity. The morning Nathan was supposed to come by, I woke up before my alarm. Showered. Dressed in black slacks and a cream blouse, simple, professional. Strong, I braided my hair back tight and neat, minimal makeup, red lipstick. The expensive one. The one I used to think was too much for me. Today, nothing was too much. Today, I was exactly enough. He was supposed to arrive at 10:30. At 10:25, I heard the door buzzer. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I smiled. He was early, of course he was. When I opened the door, Nathan stood there like a memory dressed in a blue suit. Not much had changed. Still tall. Still confident. Still smelled like that damn citrus cologne he used to overuse on date nights. But there was something else now, something tight around his jaw, a heaviness in the eyes. I stepped aside and gestured him in. Thanks for coming, I said calmly. He nodded. You look great. I didn't return the compliment. I let silence sit between us as he stepped into the office. He glanced around, slow and cautious. This is yours. It is. He gave a short whistle. Wow, I heard you were doing well, but this. He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need him to. I led him to the small conference table near the window. A folder sat neatly on top, a pen beside it. I just need you to sign a document confirming the closure of a dormant joint account we used for the LLC registration, I said. He blinked. We had one. You opened it, I said. Back when I was wired for that kind of thing. He flinched. Good. He sat down, opened the folder, scanned the page. It's standard, I said. My attorney already reviewed it. Yes, no problem. He grabbed the pen, but he didn't sign right away. Instead, he looked up. Can I ask you something? I raised an eyebrow. Why me? He asked. You could have had your lawyer send this. You didn't need to bring me here. I studied him for a moment. The man who once dismissed my ambition. The man who made me feel small in rooms I helped build. The man who married someone else and didn't even send me a text. And now he sat in my office asking me why he was here, so I told him the truth. I needed you to see it. See what? This, I gestured around the room. All of it. He looked confused. Why? Because I built it with the money you once told me I couldn't manage. Silence, he leaned back slowly. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. You mean from the divorce? I shrugged. Some from clients. Some from work I did while sleeping 4 hours a night and eating canned soup. He didn't speak, so I did. I'm not angry, Nathan. Not anymore. That would mean I still care about how you feel. I don't. His lips parted. Okay. But I do care about me. About the woman I used to be. The one who shrank so you could feel taller. I leaned forward slightly. She's not here anymore. He set the pen down. For a second, I thought he might leave. Then he asked, is this some kind of revenge? No, I said without hesitation. This is a conclusion. He stared at me for a long moment, then signed. His signature, once so familiar, now looked like the ending to a story I had outgrown. He closed the folder, stood up. I followed him to the door. He paused before opening it. I'm glad you're doing well, he said, voice low. I nodded. I know. Then I opened the door for him. He walked out, and I closed it, gently, with both hands. I leaned against the door after it clicked shut, took a breath, one of those deep, belly-level breaths that feel like an exorcism. Then I smiled, not a smirk, not a smug, vengeful curl, just peace. I walked back to my desk. On the way, I passed Grace, my plant. I touched one of her leaves. Closure is cute, I whispered. She didn't respond, but I knew she agreed. Later that afternoon, I got an email from the bank confirming the updated records. My company now had a clean slate, and so did I. No more signatures I didn't recognize. No more shadows in the margins, just my name, my choices, my empire. That night, I walked home instead of taking the train. Let the city hum around me. Let the lights blur into gold. Let the woman I used to be fall behind with each step. I didn't look back, not once. They say revenge is sweet, but for me, it tasted like stillness. Like a room finally cleared of echo. Like finally being able to hear your own thoughts after years of someone else's noise. The morning after Nathan left my office, I woke up, calm. No lingering adrenaline, no guilt, no overthinking. I made my coffee, sat by the window, watched the light filter through the blinds. I had no idea what he thought. If he was angry, shocked, embarrassed, and I didn't care, that was the beauty of healing. But of course, life has a way of testing your resolve the second you settle into it. 3 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. I didn't know she was that smart. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed one word, "Who?" The reply came immediately. "You, I meant you." It was Nathan, still trying to rewrite the story, still trying to be part of mine. I didn't reply, but I saved the text, not as fuel, not as proof, just as a reminder. That silence was my power now. In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. The new funding round came through. My team expanded. We signed 2 long-term clients. And then Eden, the woman from the Startup Accelerator, invited me to co-host a podcast series on women reclaiming financial autonomy. I almost said no. Then I thought about every woman who'd ever sat across from a man with a bank login she didn't have access to. And I said yes. The first episode was raw. I told my story, not in detail, not with names, but with truth. I talked about how easy it is to disappear when someone tells you they'll take care of it. How silence becomes survival. How starting over isn't noble, it's brutal, but worth it. The messages poured in, hundreds, women from everywhere, telling me they saw themselves in my story, that they'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be angry, to hope. It shook me, because for the first time, my pain wasn't just mine. It was a map for someone else. One night after a long recording day, I was locking up the office when I saw a message request on Instagram. From Claire. Yeah, that Claire. I froze. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. The message was short. "Hi. I know this is weird, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. And thank you." What the hell? I read it again. And again. And then I remembered something. Nathan had never told her the truth. He painted me as the emotionally unstable ex, the one who gave up on herself. He used her like he used me. And now, maybe, she was starting to see it. I didn't reply, not because I hated her, but because I didn't owe her closure. We were never on the same team. We just happened to survive the same hurricane, and I was already rebuilding. A few days later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Greg. We worked together back in my agency days. He was the kind of guy who remembered birthdays and made spreadsheets fun. Back then, he used to bring donuts every Friday, just to soften the existential dread. He recognized me first. "Holy *T, he said. "Is that really you?" I smiled, in the flesh. We grabbed coffee the next week. Then dinner. Then more dinners. I told him I wasn't looking for anything serious. He said, "Cool, I'm just looking for honesty." Which, after Nathan, felt like a miracle. Greg wasn't flashy. He didn't wear cologne that screamed, "Finance bro." He didn't talk over me. He didn't track my spending. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't flinch when I told him about my past. One night I told him the whole story. The control. The silence. The revenge that wasn't really revenge, but more like reclaiming oxygen. He just nodded, then said, "I don't know what he lost, but I know what he taught you." And I couldn't help it. I cried. For the first time in months. See, that's the thing about healing. It's not linear. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic flourish. It shows up quietly, in safe conversations, in slow dinners, in the way someone holds space for you without trying to fix you. I didn't fall in love with Greg overnight. I fell into trust. Then, eventually, I let love follow. But I didn't lose myself in it. I kept my accounts separate, my name on every document, my head clear, because love isn't sacrifice, not anymore. By the time Red Ink turned 3, we had a team of 12, a real office, a benefits plan, an intern program, and I had something I never thought I'd get back, joy, not the performative kind, not the Instagrammable kind. Real joy, the kind that lets you sleep deeply, laugh loudly, walk into a room without shrinking. Then, one rainy Wednesday, I got another email from a woman named Leela. She worked at a national creative summit. She said they wanted to feature a founder who turned personal upheaval into brand power. I laughed. Personal upheaval. What a pretty way to say your ex treated you like you were stupid and you turned it into an empire. I accepted. The summit was held in New York. I spoke in front of 500 people. I wore a red suit, the lipstick again. Same calm braid. I stood on that stage and told my story, every word mine. And afterward, as I stepped off stage, I saw Nathan, in the audience. He looked older, tired. Like a man who knew he'd lost something intangible. We didn't speak. I walked past him, high heels, head high, and he didn't stop me, not this time. Success is a strange kind of silence, not the silence of absence, the silence of no longer needing to explain yourself. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford groceries. Now, I was being invited to dinner with VCs and founders who used phrases like scaling vertically and exit strategy, like they were ordering drinks. And somehow, I wasn't just sitting at the table. I was being asked what I thought. Sometimes, I still felt like an imposter. But then I'd look around and realize most of them were guessing too. Red Ink had grown, not just in numbers, in soul. We worked with brands that gave a damn. Founders with fire in their chest. Teams who'd built their dreams with duct tape and belief. I said no more than I said yes, because I finally could. One client offered us triple our rate to write copy for their women empowerment perfume line. Except their entire executive board was men. I passed. Because the woman I was building this for wouldn't have believed that version of empowerment. Around this time, I started a mentorship circle. Nothing fancy, just 6 women. All in different stages of rebuilding. Some divorced, some single moms. One had just left a cult, literally. We met twice a month. Shared wins, failures, invoices we didn't know how to send. I didn't lead, I listened. And something happened in those small, quiet rooms. We started changing, not into different people, but into who we'd always been under all the noise. One night, after our circle, I stayed behind with Jasmine. She was the youngest, only 24, smart as hell, scared of everything. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. I smiled. None of us do. We just got tired of pretending we didn't know anything. She stared at me, then asked, do you ever miss him? That question. I'd avoided it, even with myself. I thought for a moment, then said, I don't miss him. I miss the version of me who thought he was the best I'd ever get. She nodded, and I think something cracked open in both of us. Meanwhile, Greg and I had settled into something gentle. He didn't try to fix me. He just made space. And I, for the first time, didn't feel guilty for taking it. We weren't living together. Not yet. I needed my own space. Not physically, but symbolically. But he'd leave toothbrushes at my place. Bring me coffee. Ask me how my team was doing. Not how I was doing, how my team was doing. Because he understood that my work wasn't just work. It was my freedom. One weekend, we took a trip to the coast. No laptops, no deadlines, just salt air, long walks, and bookstores with creaky floors. As we sat watching the waves, he turned to me and said, have you ever thought about what comes next? I laughed. That's all I think about. No, he said. I mean, after all this, after revenge, after healing, what's the dream now? It caught me off guard. For so long, my dream had been not being small, not being forgotten, not being controlled. But now that I was none of those things, what was left? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew I wanted to find one. That night, I pulled out an old notebook, the one I used to write my monthly goals in, back when I was still measuring progress in grocery receipts and client calls. On a clean page, I wrote, "What do you build when you're no longer trying to survive?" And beneath that, "What does joy look like if no one's watching?" A few weeks later, I got an email from a nonprofit that worked with women re-entering the workforce after incarceration. They needed someone to teach storytelling for resumes and interviews. Nothing paid, no prestige, but I felt something spark, so I said yes. The first day, I stood in a room full of women who had been told their story was a stain. I looked at them and said, "You're not starting from scratch, you're starting from wisdom." They didn't believe me, not yet, but they showed up again. And again, and one by one they began to write, not just resumes, letters, speeches, books. One woman, Carla, wrote a poem about what it meant to have a name again. It started with, "I am not my record, I am my resurrection." I cried in the parking lot after reading it, because that was it. That was the dream. Not to be known, not to be rich, but to be useful, to take the ashes of what burned and make ink from it, to help someone else write their beginning. Meanwhile, Red Ink was thriving. We opened a second location in Austin. We got featured in a top 100 women-owned businesses list. We launched a creative scholarship for underrepresented storytellers. And I kept showing up, in meetings, in circles, in rooms where my younger self would have whispered, "Are you sure you belong here?" And I would answer her, "Yes, and I'm bringing others with me." Then came the call from a major publisher. They wanted to turn my story into a book, not a scandalous memoir, not a how I got revenge tabloid hit. They wanted the truth, the rebuild, the rupture, the rise. I said yes, not because I wanted to be known, but because I wanted women like Jasmine, Carla, and me to see themselves on shelves, to feel less alone in the quiet after. Writing the book broke something open in me. I revisited emails I'd buried, read journal entries I forgot I wrote, faced versions of myself I hadn't mourned properly. I cried a lot, but I didn't drown, because grief isn't the opposite of growth. It's the companion, the proof that we tried, that we lost, that we loved something real enough to hurt. And then I published it. Red Ink, writing myself back into the story. It became a quiet bestseller. Book clubs, podcasts, letters from strangers. One day, I opened my inbox and saw a message. Subject line, "You were right." It was from Nathan. I didn't open it, didn't need to, because I already knew. Success has a strange way of circling back to you. Sometimes it arrives like a letter in the mail. Sometimes it walks right through the front door. This time, it came in the form of an email from Eden, the woman who'd once helped me secure my first funding, the one who believed in Red Ink when it was still mostly caffeine and blind faith. Her subject line was simple. "Something big need to talk." I opened it, heart steady. Inside was a proposal. She was spearheading a new project, a nationwide accelerator for female-led creative agencies. And she wanted me, not as a speaker, not as a guest, as a co-founder. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely there were more qualified women, bigger names, women with MBAs and teams twice my size, but Eden was clear. "We want you because you've built something that breathes, not just functions." I sat with it for a day, then a week. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was a turning point, because this would mean stepping away, letting my team run Red Ink, letting go, at least partially, of the thing that saved me. And that scared me more than starting from nothing ever did. Greg saw the hesitation in me before I even voiced it. We were having dinner, the same Thai takeout we'd ordered on our second date. He watched me push pad thai around with my fork. "Want to talk about it?" I shrugged. "It's just big, bigger than I expected." "You've done big before." "Yeah, but this feels different." "How so?" "It feels like I have something to lose now." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "That's what growth is. Risk with a name." I thought about that all night. Risk with a name. Red ink had a name. So did I, and now this new thing, it had potential, but it didn't have me yet. And maybe it was time to give a version of me to something bigger than just my story. I met with Eden the next week in person. She had this energy, half calm, half wildfire. We sat on a rooftop cafe, wind pulling at her blazer. She laid it out clean, a 3-year commitment, partial equity, full creative control on programming, curriculum, branding. In short, I'd be helping shape an entire generation of female founders, not just writing their stories, helping them write their own. I took a sip of cold brew and said, "I'm in." Telling my team was harder than I thought. They were supportive, excited even, but I saw the flicker in their eyes. "What happens without you?" I reassured them. Delegated with intention, promoted 2 of my leads to new roles, and then I stepped out, not completely, not forever, but enough. The first few months were chaos. Schedules, staff, strategy, stakeholders, I was exhausted. But it was the good kind. The kind that feels like forward motion. We launched the pilot program in 3 cities. Over 150 women applied. We took 24. The first cohort included a single mom from Mississippi who designed ethical denim, a refugee from Syria launching a cooking subscription box, a trans woman creating a marketplace for inclusive lingerie. Every story different, but everyone carried the same undercurrent. "I just want a shot." And that's what we gave them. Structure, mentorship, capital, but more than that, belief. The kind that doesn't expire when the grant money runs out. One night, I stayed late to help one of our founders, Nia, prep her pitch. She was nervous, kept second-guessing her slides. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I just make candles, I'm not a businesswoman." I looked at her and said, "You're a woman who makes light out of wax. That sounds like business to me." She laughed, then nailed her presentation the next day. That was the magic. Not in the metrics, in the moments. Meanwhile, Greg and I kept growing too. Not perfectly, but steadily. We talked about moving in, talked about building something together, but we also talked about not rushing, because we both knew what it looked like to build on shaky ground. This time, we wanted foundation, not just walls. Some nights, I'd lay in bed thinking about my past life. Not with regret, not with anger, just with distance. Like watching a movie you used to love, but now only remember in pieces. And that felt like healing. Then came the press. The accelerator got picked up by a major publication. Then another. Then a podcast. Suddenly, I was getting invites to speak at places I used to dream of attending. And then, I got an email. From someone I hadn't thought about in a long time. Claire, Nathan's now ex-wife. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. She wrote, "I don't expect you to reply, but I wanted you to know you were right about him. About everything. I didn't see it until it happened to me. He left for someone else while I was going through IVF. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I hope you're thriving. You deserve it." I stared at the screen. So many feelings. Pity, vindication, sadness, closure, but mostly relief, because I no longer needed an apology to know my worth. I was already living it. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood up, walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and toasted to the version of me who once thought forgiveness had to come from the other person. It didn't. It came from the mirror, from showing up, doing the work, and finally letting go. There's a moment when everything you've built finally stands still, just long enough for you to see it. Not in the chaos, not in the headlines, but in the hush between wins. It happened one Friday evening. The office was empty. The sun dipped low, and I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city that once swallowed me whole. Except now I had roots, not in the ground, but in myself. Red ink had hit 7 figures that quarter. The accelerator had secured a 3-year grant from a foundation I used to only admire on LinkedIn. My book had been translated into 4 languages, and I was asked to deliver a TEDx talk next spring. It was the kind of success I never dared to write down, not because I didn't want it, but because I thought I had to choose between power and peace. Turns out I could have both, in my own way. Greg and I were doing well. So well, in fact, that one evening as we cooked together, me stirring, him chopping, he said, "I've been thinking." I turned. "That's always dangerous." He smiled. "About us?" I raised an eyebrow. "I love you," he said simply. "And I want more." More, the word echoed. "I don't mean to pressure you," he added quickly. I see a life with you, and I want to build it together." My first instinct was to panic, not because I didn't love him, but because I'd finally built a world where love wasn't the center, it was the support beam. I didn't want to lose that. He saw my hesitation and nodded. "You don't have to answer now." So I didn't, but I didn't ignore it either. I thought about the version of me that said yes too quickly, and the version that said no out of fear, and the one who finally learned to pause, to breathe, to choose, not react. That weekend, I went away alone. A cabin upstate, no Wi-Fi. No planners, just silence. I walked in the woods, wrote in my journal, sat on the porch with hot tea and old thoughts. And on the 3rd morning, I woke up and realized I wasn't afraid of commitment. I was afraid of losing myself again. But Greg was Nathan, and I wasn't that girl anymore, so I went home and I said yes. Not to marriage, not yet, but to the next step, whatever we wanted that to be. The following month, I was invited to a Women in Business Summit in Chicago. Keynote speaker. A seat next to women I once idolized from the back row. As I prepped my talk, I kept thinking about how many times I'd reintroduced myself to the world. First as a copywriter, then as a founder, then as a voice. Now, I wanted to be a bridge, not just a story, not just a brand, but a doorway for others. At the summit, I stood on stage under the warm lights, hundreds of faces watching. And I said, "I'm not here because I won. I'm here because I stayed." I talked about burnout, about betrayal, about the cost of shrinking, and the reward of taking up space again. Women cried, I cried. And when it ended, someone from the front row approached me. She was maybe 22, hair pulled back, eyes determined. She said, "I don't have your experience, but I have your fire." I handed her my card. "Then use it." Back home, things moved fast. We got a bigger office. Our accelerator opened a 4th location. Greg and I started looking at apartments, not to escape, but to expand. And then, the email came, from Nathan, again. This time it wasn't passive. It was long, wordy, wounded. He wrote, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I've been following your journey. I wanted to say I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry. Not because you need it, but because I do. I ruined something good. You never deserved the way I treated you. I know that now." I read it once, twice, then deleted it. No anger, no smugness, just peace. Because this time, it really was over. I told Greg about it later. He didn't flinch. Didn't get jealous, didn't gloat. He just said, "Closure is quiet, huh?" And I smiled. Yeah, like turning out the last light in a house you don't live in anymore. That night, I curled up on the couch, wine in hand, laptop open, and started writing again. Not a speech, not a proposal, a new book, not about revenge, not even about rebuilding, about the aftermath, the quiet power of living well, of loving again, of choosing joy without permission. I titled the document, "Beyond the Burn," and I let the words come. No one tells you that peace comes with its own kind of fear. When things are quiet, when joy becomes ordinary, you start to wait for the shoe to drop. And sometimes it does, but not the way you expect. It started with a call from my mom. Now, my mom and I had always had a complicated relationship. Love wasn't the issue. Communication was. She was the kind of woman who believed pain should be swallowed, not shared. That emotions were private currency, never to be spent in public. So when she called out of the blue and said, "Can we talk?" I knew something was wrong. We met at a small diner, halfway between her town and mine. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that builds slowly over years. She ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. She didn't waste time. "It's your father." My stomach clenched. I hadn't spoken to him in over 8 years. Not since he'd walked out. Not since the divorce that shattered more than just their marriage. "He's sick," she said. "Pancreatic, stage 4. The words hung in the air. Not heavy, not light, just there. I didn't know how to feel. This was the man who once told me that crying was weakness, who mocked my dreams, who told me no man would ever put up with a mouth like mine. But he was still my father, and now he was dying. I nodded slowly. "Do you want me to see him?" She shrugged. "I'm not here to guilt you. I just thought you'd want to know." I didn't answer, but I paid the bill, and I drove home in silence. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room. Greg sat beside me, quiet. I told him everything, from the bruises that weren't physical, to the words that stuck like splinters for years. He didn't say, "You should forgive," or "He's still your dad." He just asked, "What do you need?" And I realized I didn't know. A week passed. Then, too, I kept working, kept building. But the news sat in my chest like wet cement. So finally, I made the call to the hospice center. They said he wasn't speaking much anymore. That time was short. I drove there alone. 3 hours. No music. Just the hum of the road and the thunder of old memories. When I arrived, the nurse guided me to his room. He looked smaller, like the anger had been keeping him inflated. And now, deflated, he was just a man. I sat beside him. He turned his head slightly. Eyes flickered open. And for a moment, we just stared. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, "You look strong." I nodded. "I am." He tried to smile, failed. "I watched your TED Talk your mother showed me." I said nothing. "I was wrong," he added. "About you, about everything." And I didn't cry. I just placed my hand over his, not for him, for me. We sat in silence for an hour, then I left, and I didn't go back. That visit cracked something open in me, not grief, not closure, just space. The space where anger had once lived. It was empty now, but not hollow, just ready. Ready for the next chapter. Back at the office, things were in full swing. Our latest cohort was pitching to investors. Red Ink had landed its biggest account yet, and I'd been asked to speak at a global conference for women in leadership. But amidst all that, I couldn't stop thinking about time, about how fast it moves, how easily it slips through our fingers. I thought about the women I mentored, about Greg, about my mom. And I realized I wanted to do something more permanent, more personal, not just build, but give back. That night, I told Greg, "I want to start a fund," I said, "a grant, for women who have been through hell and want to build something anyway." His face lit up, like a foundation. "Exactly. No red tape, no strings, just belief and a bank account." He smiled. "That sounds like you." We got to work. Quietly, intentionally, I called it the Ashes Fund. Because that's where we start, not at zero, at the ruin, and we rise. At the launch event, I stood in front of a small crowd. No cameras, no press. Just women who'd survived things they don't write movies about. And I said, "You don't owe anyone your pain, but if you're willing to share it, we'll make sure it fuels something." They clapped, but it wasn't about applause. It was about ignition. Later that night, I checked my inbox. Another message from Claire, short this time. "He's getting remarried. I hope she's smarter than we were." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need the story anymore. I had mine. And it was bigger than him. Bigger than revenge, it was real. Every story has a final scene, not an ending, just a room where everything makes sense. This is mine. It was a Thursday, gray outside, rain sketching soft lines on my office windows, a kind of quiet that felt ceremonial. We were opening our third physical location, an old warehouse turned creative sanctuary, a place where women could write, pitch, cry, rebuild, whatever the day called for. And we were calling it The Room, because every woman deserves one. Not just a seat at the table, but a space of her own. A space with her name on the door. A space she doesn't have to explain herself to enter. The grand opening was intimate. Past clients, mentors, friends, my mother, Greg. Even Jasmine, now running her own consulting firm. Even Carla, whose poetry had landed her a publishing deal. We drank Prosecco, laughed, cried. I gave a short speech. But what I remember most is not what I said. It's what I felt. A soft, full-circle kind of peace. After the guests left, I walked through the empty building, touched the walls, ran my fingers over the old brick. Imagined the stories this place would now hold. And in the center hallway, I stopped. There was a plaque. Not big, but bold. It read, "For every woman told she was too much, too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, this room is yours." And below that, just one word, begin. The next day, I sat in my office going through logistics. Hiring, budgets, upcoming interviews. Greg came by with lunch. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me for a moment, then said, "You know, you've changed the world." I rolled my eyes. "Let's not get dramatic." "I'm serious," he smiled. "You didn't just heal, you built a ladder." I looked up at him, "And you climbed it." That night, over dinner, he took my hand. "Can I ask something?" I nodded. He pulled out a small box. But inside wasn't a ring, it was a silver key. "To the house I've been secretly renovating for 6 months," he said. I blinked. He grinned. "No pressure, just a place that's ours, if and when you're ready." And suddenly, I was crying. Not because I was afraid, because I was. Because this time the love came with freedom, not conditions, with room. We moved in together 3 months later. Not rushed, not perfect, but right. The house had big windows, warm wood floors. A garden and space, not just for guests, for chapters. I kept working, kept writing. The Ashes Fund expanded. Red Ink partnered with nonprofits across the country. And I started teaching a storytelling seminar once a quarter, for free. Because I remembered what it felt like to want to say something and not know how. One fall afternoon, I got a call from a woman I didn't know. She introduced herself as Hannah. She was 29. Her fiancé had just left her. She'd been following my story. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just don't want to disappear." I smiled into the phone. "You won't. Not if you write your way through it." We talked for an hour, not about him, about her. And at the end, she said, "You should really write a book on how to heal after betrayal." I laughed. I already did. But later that night, I thought about what she said. What if the next book wasn't about me? What if it was a manual, not on business, not on branding, on coming back, on becoming? So I started writing. I called it The Blueprint. One morning, I was walking through the room, checking in on one of our new teams. They were designing an app for single moms to exchange services and support. One of them, a woman in her 40s with soft eyes, stopped me. "You don't remember me, do you?" I frowned. "I was at that first workshop, in the church basement. You said something I've never forgotten." "What's that?" She looked me dead in the eye. "That your worst chapter doesn't have to be your last one." And I realized she wasn't the only one who remembered. I did too. Not because I lived in that chapter anymore, but because I turned its ashes into ink. Its ink into a map, and the map into a door. That led here, to this room. This life, this love. Nathan never wrote again. Last I heard, he moved states. Claire, too, and I didn't care. Not in a cold way, in a free way. Like watching a boat sail off a shore you no longer wait on. One evening, I stood in my garden, twilight all around. Greg brought me tea. We watched the stars come out. And I thought, this is it. Not the revenge, not the headlines, not the keynotes. The quiet, the choosing. The woman I became when no one was watching. And in that stillness, I finally understood. The best revenge isn't winning. It's no longer needing to.